Here we are again, gentlemen, Michael and Cam, and this time we are going to be discussing Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series by Vervaeke, John Vervaeke, and we'll be covering episode 35, Symbol, Sacredness, Sacred, and episode 36, which is Reverse Engineering Enlightenment. Those are the two topics on the docket today. Let me first start by checking in. How are we coming in today?
Pretty good.
Solid.
Good.
Yeah.
Start with gratitude in that case, that I'm grateful and thankful that we are connecting again and continuing our dialogue. And anyone wants to say anything before we move to the procedure we have established?
I think I'm ready to go for it.
Okay. Cam, do you want to help us kick this off by
I'd love to.
Summarizing the episode number 35, particularly for now?
So I'm going to read the opening remarks from the transcript of episode 36, which recapitulates what was covered in episode 35. So last time we were continuing our examination of sacredness, the experience of sacredness, the Schleiermacher side of things. And I was trying to develop an account of what symbols are, at least symbols insofar as they are distinct from signs, as a way of trying to understand the role that symbols have in our understanding of sacredness. So I was presenting to you the view that symbols are a participatory act, and that participation has a connection to the activation of a profound kind of metaphor. By activating that metaphor, we are reaching backwards through our exaptation and reactivating that material so that we can re-exapt our cognitive processes and re-experience, reappreciate, re-see, re-understand some aspect of reality. And that re-exaptation makes the use of a symbol a deeply participatory, transformative thing that we do, and that with a symbol, we are activating all that exaptive machinery in order to hold something in mind so that we can see more deeply into it, be more in contact with it. And then I argued that the point of that is ultimately to set up an anagogic process by which I am transformed. So I can see through the symbol into reality, and so that reality can speak through the symbol to me, and that we get an anagogic flow happening, and I'm becoming deeply integrated. The world is becoming disclosed, and that mutual reciprocal realization feels deeply like love, coupling to reality in a profound way. Is that enough to get us started?
I think that's a pretty good start.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, who wants to kick off with some opening comments?
I can start with that. I mean, I'm very grateful for this part because I've never understood symbols this clearly before. Like, this is really helpful. And it's especially interesting because I've been studying the Bible more. I'm starting to attend a church into the sermons every Sunday, and I finally understand, at least to some degree, what the cross represents. So, for a Christian, if you look at the cross, you are called to live as Christ did. That's what you're seeing when you look at the cross. It's no small thing. It's like, it's one hell of a goal, right? I mean, because it's really lofty, and it's amazing how much of is condensed into that symbol. Like, there's whole volumes in there. I'm like, wow. And what I also really like what he says in here is a symbol is used for the purpose of reminding you of something that's hard to keep in mind, right? That's its purpose, and that's you look at it so you don't forget that orientation. I think that's how I understand it. It reminds you of how to be, and that's unbelievably useful. like for me to, because symbols in art, like I've always known it from a factual sort of kind of like a narrative point of view to some degree, but this goes so much deeper because the symbol is it evokes the remembrance of the pattern of being. That's how I would say it was. And I'm like, now I get how powerful they really are, and how even a brand is the same thing, right? It's so funny how you can't get away from it, really.
Yeah.
So that's one of my takeaways. And I also took Jonathan Peugeot's class through the Peterson Academy on symbols
Oh, nice.
Oh, wow.
recently,
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
it's one hell of a combo, I'll tell you, because he talks about how symbols are created from reality. So he says that what people don't understand is symbols are not arbitrarily made up by
Yeah.
someone who is fantasizing in their head about something. It's about how humans have related to life, and how, like the heavens and the earth, and there's these orientations that we have that are based on reality. And he says, so symbols are not fantasy representations. It's exactly what we're learning here, but he give it a broad context about how they're put together. And then when you're looking at art, or you're reading about something that's symbolic, it's much easier for me to understand what they're saying because of both of these. So anyway, that's I think that's one of my favorite sections of his whole course is these last 3 episodes or 3 lectures. I mean, we have a base too, and it's not like he could have started here, right?
Yeah.
He wouldn't have.
He's putting all the pieces together in the last 10 episodes, so which is why it makes fantastic payoff.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
Yeah. Cam, how about you? What are your thoughts, reactions?
Well, before I get into my own thoughts, there's a couple of things that I had in notes that I want to call the group's attention to.
Sure.
So in this episode, he carefully makes the point, as I understand it, that so he talks about the metaphysical, how does he refer to that? The necessity of the metaphysical, but he points out how he thinks what leads to that, and then says, this is why I think it's wrong. This is why I think basically he's saying that there's the qualification of the sacred. So first there's a distinction between the experience of sacredness as differentiated from the sacred.
Right.
And then he talks about the sacred, and there's a chain that I can't do justice to by myself, but basically makes a link between the sacred be necessitating an absolute value, and then extending that to a metaphysical necessity of something supernatural, something, which is where he gets into the McGilchristen type language, where it says not a thing. So that's he talks about it as that absolute value, or the insistence upon a supernatural thing, as a claim that there is an essence to relevance. And he says there's the flaw, because relevance is not a thing. There's a process of relevance realization. It's a process. It's a no thingness. So that was important for me to register yet again. I think I've probably heard that 4 or 5 times now, and I still don't think I fully got it. But
it took me a while to get. Yeah.
So I just wrote his alternative, I think, here, which is that the sacred is the transjective relationship between the combinatorially explosive nature of reality, which is ultimately a no thingness, makes the point yet again that reality will always transcend your framing, and then links the no thingness which is the nature of reality, with the no thingness, which is the nature of me. So I am not a thing. I am also a process. I am the embodiment of the process of relevance realization. That's one way to say it. The one other thing I'll draw attention to, and then I'll be quiet. And Anurag, I'll ask for your thoughts or comments. Was when he drew the little bit where he goes through the whole first part of the episode and makes the point. He makes the link between relevance realization and religio. And he makes the point yet again that relevance realization is inherently, necessarily interested in itself. If it weren't, it would become irrelevant. So it has to be inherently interested in itself. And my mind goes, well, so how is that different than processes of narcissism? And the difference fundamentally is that the process of relevance realization, processes of narcissistic processes are inherently only self-interested, whereas the processes of relevance realization are interested in the coupling of the agent and the arena. So that's that right. Transjective, it's an interest in that transjective relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, those were the salient points, we say, for me.
So thank you, Cam. Just a minor thing. I think the points you made are absolutely valid, but according to me, they're probably the next episode and not of this particular episode. Not that it matters. It's just because I think in this episode, there's a lot of groundwork he lays out for the points you're making that come later. And the way I see, because you're trying to explain what he calls reverse engineering enlightenment. So not that it matters, we'll come back to it, but let me summarize my take or my explanation of episode 35, just because I think it kind of is a precursor to the stuff he's laying down later as a process. I took away, starting with a symbol, much like both of you were saying in the early, that it is a opponent processing between meta-assimilation and meta-accommodation. To him, meta-accommodation means I'm actively participating something that is not familiar to me. And meta-assimilation is something I have already assimilated and have understood. So he's trying to say that two different processes that are happening, and that he builds upon in the previous chapter where he's talking about, sacredness is a boundary between what is awesome, wonderful, and what is horror, losing grip with reality, and what is home and what I'm comfortable with. The reason I'm saying that is he starts by saying there's a reason why we have to stay grounded at home, understand that we are on the firm place, and on the horizon is horror, our loss of reality, and the potential that we will not understand the combinatorial explosion of reality. But then he says the symbol is a way of balancing the two opponent processing, where at some point we make sense of it. We try to hold the symbol that activates our participation. And that's what I think is unique about symbol. It forces us to not just abstractly have a meaning for an object, but forces us to start acting towards it in a participatory way. And he uses example of justice symbol, blind woman with scales. Like, it's not enough that you just understand that at a sign language level. But if you think about it in a particular situation, then it'll force you to start thinking, are you being just? Is this a fair situation? Is it impartial? All the things that a symbol unpacks. My favorite personal example of that I've been reflecting in these times is a symbol of a national flag, right? It is for some people, like any symbol can have a lot of meaning for people who come from that community, like a cross for the Christian community. And for outside the community, it might have very little to no significance. Similarly, if you are in the army or in the armed forces and serving, a national flag can have a significant meaning in terms of honor, valor, et cetera, set of higher order values, all of that, right? And therefore, desecrating it can be deeply repugnant or offensive, right? So I think there is a whole set of things that unlock using that as an example. Whereas if you're not part of the community, like non-Christians might not appreciate the power of a cross. If you're outside of that country or outside of the community who recognizes the power of that symbol of a flag, you might not see the value of it. You might say it's no big deal. But the point is, people who understand the value of each of those symbols can use it to really both affirm their power of the symbol, even when they desecrate it, right? It's not an accident.
Yeah, why else would you desecrate it?
Exactly right. Exactly.
Why would you care, right?
So even if you are saying, I'm going to burn the flag, using that as an example, right? You understand the power of that symbol precisely because it has that ability to activate not just emotion, but very strong participation and motivation and action. So I found all of that to be really, really interesting. What I really found either deeper is that when he starts talking about symbol as something which is beyond our current frame, and why is it anagogic? Meaning, why does it force me to transform myself? Because a symbol represents a part of the reality that is not accessible to me in my current frame, which I found was very helpful. And when
That's helpful, yeah.
Right, because he's saying a symbol, if you point yourself to it and pursue it, right, and not just pursue it intellectually, but pursue it by participating in what it's calling you to participate in, you break the frame that you were locked in, and you are able to now get to a level of reality disclosed that you did not have access to. And that really is part of the reason why it's anagogic. That's part of the reason why coming back to the symbol and reflecting and acting on it breaks frame and allows you to become someone you're not, like, or better or different or aspire for different things. I found, and again, he's brilliant because he's paying off on the whole work he did when he was building up the machinery of relevance realization and this whole idea of a frame in which we are constantly thinking. And so forth. So that's kind of some of my examples, and he ties it back to symbol. When you're pursuing that, like, transformation of a symbol towards a symbol, you come back to this idea of flow state and being in a quote unquote serious play, right?
Yeah.
So that allows you to kind of get to that, and just final points are, he makes a clear distinction. And this was at another lecture I was listening to him on sacredness by Vervaeke, that today, when people say, what is sacred to you? Sadly, in today's modern world, sacred becomes an object, and sacred becomes a set of propositions. Like, yes. I hold, the words in Bible to be literally true and quote unquote sacred.
Right.
Or I hold this book to be true. And so it's a physical propositional thing. Whereas I think, of course, that's why he's saying the idea of sacredness is so different, because it's a way of aspiring to be something that is not available to you right now and is truly important and valuable to you. And that is a very different view. And he says that 150 years ago, if you had gone to somebody and argued that sacredness is a set of propositions, they would have looked at you in a bizarre way. They would not have understood that to be the meaning of sacred at all.
Well, so this is real helpful, as usual, how you're framing this for us. Do you see it then as, this is what's kind of coming to mind as you were framing this, is that the symbol is a tool that helps bring together things that are really hard to bring together otherwise, right? So it's part of the machinery, as he puts it, of RR, right? So we have, but it's an essential piece that, I do remember now what you said, he said it many times actually, that the symbol is, it's what balances out the different processes when you're trying to reach something that you don't know how to reach, right? That's what you said?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Because so it's relevance. I mean, it's like participatory knowing is what it activates. Is that partly true, or is it
exactly true? It forces you to participate in a process because you sense that there is something beyond your current understanding, beyond your current frame, and it is numinous. It's like not clear,
Right.
but it is just
So-
beyond your grasp or frame. And therefore, it invites you to reflect, act, participate, like, engage in activities. That is why later on he talks about community. That's where and the act of service and act of other things. That is what drives the anagoge around these, not simply an object, right? Not simply,
Yeah.
fighting on the propositions represented by the object.
I really want to introduce a visual aid.
Lovely,
So
go for it.
your brain cross section.
The 4 parts?
So, well, before I do that, as I was listening to you, I was being reminded that in episode 35, he also talks about, I believe, that underneath any symbol is a metaphor.
So
And
right.
then
Thank
he
you.
talks about
Thank you. That's a good one.
the so I'm gonna reach into I can't do it right now. But I was thinking about something that you said, Michael, I think last time about cerebellum. So
Yeah.
that's this back here, right? And Vervaeke talks about the process of exaptation. So there's we exapt, or our biological entities, our evolutionary arc as a species or as life itself exapts. So it's basically taking it in just within my own body. I suppose it goes motoric, this is the part that'll link to EMP. So locomotive motoric action, and then the complexes of that. He used the metaphor of balancing a lot in this episode. So there's all kinds of balancing going on in that, just the moving of the body through the world. And then that metaphor becomes a symbol that then exapts up into higher order cognitive function. So the symbol then of balancing, standing on one foot, or choose your symbol of that metaphor, by focusing attention on that. He also spent a lot of time talking about breath. So focusing on that, focusing attention on it, starts to move the process. He said, so this is my words, but me paraphrasing him, affords the opportunity to reach backward through that process of exaptation. So I'm seeing that as, there's stuff going on, there's activity, neurological activity that's happening through the processes of simply moving the body through the world, and then exapting. There's connections being made, neurological structures being formed through the process of that cerebellum. It seems like trying to take what it's learning in those lower order motoric functions into the higher order cognitive functions. And the symbol is the path, so to speak, backwards through that process. So when the world has changed, when the arena has shifted, then there's a misinterpretation. If I don't update that process of exaptation for the change, for the modification in the environment, then I'm necessarily erring in some form or fashion as I move the body through the world, or more abstractly, moving through my higher order cognitive function thought processes. So the symbol is the path that allows me to pay close attention to how I got here, so to speak, how I got to the point where I'm making this error, and affords me the opportunity to rejigger that exaptation, now considering the real relationship with the present reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And I wanted to add a few things to that, because I agree
Please.
with what you were saying, totally. And it's so the thing that's so crazy is, I think I said this before, is that the therapeutic protocol that I have in my office, called the focus, or the integrative listening system, what they taught me when I learned how to use it is that the vestibular system, well, just like he said here, it's both for orienting physically and orienting emotionally and psychologically. So, and one of the things that I totally get now is that the reason why the philosophers rustled before they philosophized is because the rustling activated the brain in orientation so that they could more clearly philosophize. And it actually is a necessary element, which is wild. It's like they figure that, the Greeks figured that out all the way back then. And because the thing that's so crazy is that through this system that I
That's
use,
probably not that hard to figure out, by the way. Like if we're first person and we're arguing, we're it's not going to take us very long to get into a wrestling
no,
match.
right.
And then
It's
we're going
like
to
you're like,
reason
come on, let's wrestle on that, you know. But it's the thing that's so nutty about this system is that so through multisensory stimulus, music that's modified to affect the brain in a certain way, it's all classical, and there's a little bit of Gregorian chant in one section, and then what you do is you do core exercises, which are essential, and then vestibular exercises where you're catching and throwing and coordinating, and you're on a balance board. And what you do is you incrementally complexify the exercise as you get more skilled at each challenge, right? So it's the same thing as what we do intellectually and emotionally, is that you want to
Interesting.
incrementally. But the thing is if you don't do it with this exercise stuff first, then what happens is that your nervous system doesn't know how to organize the information that it's taking in. So that's what it actually does, is it actually helps the nervous system organize, sort, and create relevance to the most important thing in relationship to what you're doing, right? So, because if the focus is to catch the ball, right, that's the goal, and you're on a balance board and you're bouncing it in different ways and then trying to catch it in both hands and so on. If you don't focus on the right thing, you're not going to catch it and you're going to fall off, right? So this is an interesting exercise in relevance, because the relevance is staying balanced and catching the ball in a certain way. And I think that there's no difference with that is trying to stay on track, you know, in terms of a symbol, right? So the symbol becomes maybe the ball, right? And the ball and that symbol in your mind becomes the way in which you know whether you're doing things right, because it gives you feedback. The symbol gives you feedback, just like the ball does. So does that make sense to you guys?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to start juggling now.
Yep, I recommend it. Anyway, so that to me, this is having this all come together is spine tingling.
Yes,
Oh, I
there
didn't
we
know
go.
you could juggle. Good job.
That's a skill.
Can I talk and juggle at the same time?
That's a
Can I
skill.
philosophize? How's the
See?
philosophy?
This is the second level, right? Skill. This is like a procedural knowledge.
Yep.
Writing a book on juggling is not enough.
No, it's right. You got to be able to.
You got to toss the ball in the air eventually.
So this is amazing. This is really nice to see these things come together. And the thing that's also amazing is I've watched myself and clients go from having very challenging situations, like this 10-year-old I'm working with, he has ADD. And his mother is just like, I actually helped her out of chronic pain. No one else could help her. So I use similar stuff. She's like, his emotional regulation is totally different. He's like, he doesn't make friends easily because he doesn't know how to be reciprocal. And that's starting to happen automatically. He's more calm. He's easier to get along with. And he's very, he's much more self-regulated in all kinds of situations. So it's incredible because there's no talk therapy, right? All he's doing is playing. That's what this is.
Yeah. That's
play,
amazing.
Right? So that's
physical.
cool.
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks. That's been really, what you said, Cam, I thought was excellent. And I agree. Anyway, really cool stuff here.
Cam, would you do us the honor of teeing up the next episode, which you've already spoken a little bit about, so it'll be perfect.
Yeah, so this will be 36, is that right?
Yes, the episode is 36, but you'll
episode 36. So I'll read the recap at the beginning of 37.
Thank you.
So last time we were taking a look at a proposal that we could now understand the sacred, that which causes the experience of sacredness, in terms of a transjective inexhaustibility and a kind of deep anagoge between the no-thingness of your ever-evolving relevance realization and its mysterious depths, and the no-thingness of reality that is ultimately combinatorially explosive and dynamically changing itself. We can acknowledge the important role of the symbolic, the way it helps us to engage and activate the primordial aspects of religio and go through processes of re-exaptation, causing new emergent abilities, so that as we are opening up to the world, we are also opening up ourselves in response to that. But I cautioned against confusing indispensability, your own or our collective at times indispensability, with any kind of claims of metaphysical necessity or an absolute essence. And that was part of the larger critique, that relevance can't have an absolute essence, and therefore we shouldn't think of the sacred ultimately as a supernaturally endowed, absolutely essential form of relevance. So then I propose to you that part of what we saw, at least the experience of sacredness doing, was helping to facilitate the higher order relevance realization, that meta realization between homing us against domicide, the meta assimilation, but also causing us to confront the numinous, the meta accommodation. So the sacred is doing it. But I also propose that we needed to look at this more deeply. We needed to look at how the sacred helps us address perennial problems. So that took us into opening up and becoming a little bit more analytic about the meaning crisis. You want me to keep going into the two components, or is that enough?
Let's talk about this before we talk about the perennial problems.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll build upon what you had already teed up, Cam, a few minutes ago, about this idea of combinatorial explosion of reality on one side. And he says the fact that we are at the edge of it and we are constantly have to grapple with that like infinitude, so to speak. And he talks about that as a process of accommodation, meta accommodation, because something new, something unknown, something numinous is always impinging on us just by the limited beings we are. And therefore, we need to make sense of it and accommodate it. And then on the other hand, what we already know, where are we already situated, is our home, our center, which is already assimilated. This is the propositions, the procedural, the practices that we already have mastered, the knowledge we have acquired. That's the homing, that's the center. So I think he's saying when you are constantly going back and forth between them, the unknown and the known, the meta accommodation and the meta assimilation that you already have, that's what drives the participation, right, of engaging with the unknown. And he's saying that's where the symbols really help you keep that in front of you, because that is just beyond your current frame and current reach. And that's the anagogic flow. What I really like about what he's doing very carefully, the most important point in my mind he makes once he describes this, what he calls a way to describe enlightenment and sacredness in his framework. The most important point he makes is this does not make it a metaphysical necessity, which I think is an interesting one, because he's saying, unlike every metaphysical view of a religion or two, which actually starts making claims based on sacredness of either a divine being or a symbol is actually an abstraction or an essence of something in the cosmos, or certain descriptions of how the metaphysics of the world has to be, right? He's saying none of that is necessary. What that interesting point is that he's not saying it's not there, because he's saying from a scientific perspective, it's not necessary.
Yeah, you don't need to. He says that it's perfectly, he takes one step back from that, as I understood it, and acknowledges that a particular symbol may in fact be indispensable. He confesses such things of his oath to a particular person or a particular community in a particular context. I think he says that is a perfectly plausible hypothesis. And then he proceeds from there.
Yes. That distinction is so important because I will read what he said. He said certain mythologies or mythos may be socially, culturally, historically necessary or even indispensable, such as cross in Christianity, such as Om and swastika in Hinduism. These are symbols.
So it's basically whatever it took to make life meaningfully coherent to me now. So
or a person or a group, to make life to a person or a group coherent, accessible, appreciate the advancement of religio, the machinery, the process. And he stops there, right? On a personal front, what is more interesting to me outside of these lectures is that I am, as I was telling earlier, I'm going pretty deep into Vedanta, which is the Indian philosophy, etc., non-dualistic philosophy particularly. And over there, it actually starts pushing for a certain metaphysical claims of reality. And whether you like it or not, and again, this is outside completely the scope of his project, every cosmology, every even scientific view, as well as religious views, have to have some view on the ultimate metaphysics. And that's and for Buddhists, it didn't matter. They didn't care. For many other religions, they care and they start proposing those metaphysical, what I call grounding assumptions upon which everything else floats up from or builds up from. And that I found that not everybody has the appetite for or should have to have the appetite for discussing or debating, because he's so clear about that is not a necessity.
Now, what do you guys think about that statement from Vervaeke? I'm curious about how you feel.
Well, so I'm happy to answer that. I'll tell you what I think about it. I mean, he's forthrightly he's making an argument that is, I think he says, grounded in the naturalistic explanation. Right. He's not, in what he's doing, he's expressly not trying to go beyond that. So I think it's a perfectly honest, perfectly straightforward.
So he's not, that's what I was wondering. So he's not denying that it might exist. He's just not going there.
Exactly. He's being a faithful scientist, I would say.
Fair enough, and good for him. Like, in other words, he says, I'm not going to dive into that muck. We're just going to stay here and say that maybe it's not even necessary to go there anyway.
So here's what's interesting.
I don't know that he says that it isn't necessary to go there. He says that he's not interested in going there. He's building it. He's doing a very logical form of argumentation. And he's confining it to a naturalistic explanation. My personal sense, and I think probably his as well, at some point that becomes unsatisfactory. So you reach the limit. You necessarily run into the limit of what you can determine about the nature of reality using a strictly naturalistic or a strictly actually I shouldn't say it that way. Strictly through a scientific approach. So you get a very high resolution naturalistic explanation that is utterly insufficient to explain the depth of reality that faces you moment to moment. And that is where you necessarily step into the domain of the metaphysical and the religious, I believe. That's how I experience reality.
I think that's a fair framing, because that's my sense.
No, he's very clear about it. And I completely agree with what Cam is laying out. The way you're articulating is 100% I agree with, because what you are saying is that he is judicious about drawing a boundary, and he's, after all, a scientist, a cognitive scientist, and is trying to pull together everything from history, philosophy, religion, across so many different domains. He doesn't want to overreach, and by his own earlier explanation of theories of explanation, where he talked about plausibility, like so many things can be plausible, etc., he would be very cautious about overreaching, right? So I think he's on fair ground, and his project at the educational level and his objective was to re-engineer enlightenment, right? So in that regard, I think this is the right frame. But I do think that to your point, Cam, it might not be satisfactory. Having said that, 99% of the people might be satisfied with it and might not have any more curiosity to go deeper into the metaphysical questions. It requires a certain bent of mind and for you to want to explore
it
that.
requires a certain amount of luxury.
Exactly.
I mean, most people don't have time to worry.
Exactly right.
I agree. That's like
appetite.
Well, there's another thing that comes to mind for me as well, which is I actually think a lot of people try to go into the metaphysical without this grounding. And that's part of what turns me off about people that are quote religious, is they're talking about those metaphysical principles with no conception of how to actually enact it. They just go blah, 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 God's will, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, what is that? Doesn't connect anything for me. It's like, it's like just a bunch of noise to me. So that's why I appreciate what he spent so much time on saying, here's the mechanisms that can be relatable through science, right?
Exactly.
And that's great. I mean, it's like good for, I love it because that's, and I do think that the other stuff's important too, but I think a lot of people put the cart before the horse, which is one reason I like Stoicism so much. It's just like this.
Yeah. Buddhism
processes,
and Stoicism. Yeah.
Right. Simple processes that can be used on the fly to reorient you in your life towards a better way of being in the world, right? That's, fantastic, and then they're not talking about, the Stoics didn't talk about anything metaphysical. They were just like practical ways of being.
It's a series of practices.
Yeah, it's practices to keep you in line of being a better person and making better.
Which Vervaeke, what's interesting is Vervaeke he's also that. Like he's also a heavy duty practitioner. He's a lover of wisdom.
Yeah.
And he understands that wisdom only comes through that participatory.
Right. Which I totally love him for that, because I just knew that in my gut. Like you can't just philosophize, you have to enact. And it's amazing how, for me, once I understood things like polyvagal theory, the chart behind me, and then I tried to figure out how to apply it, and oh my God, this second stage is humbling.
Yeah.
It is so humbling because it's not easy. Like I even know how to enact it in my life pretty well. But knowing how to translate that for other people is like, wow, this is not easy at all. Yeah. I mean, it's just really, it's like I'm humbled every day by it. I'm like, how do I say it?
If I may, I applaud you for doing that, because what you're doing is hard stuff. You're taking something that is non-propositional only, right? That is not just simply like bunch of statements that you imbibe, and you're trying to put it in practice to actually get to meaning and relief of suffering, physical and mental. Right? Yeah. And to transport, first to grasp that, then to practice it in a way that it actually works rather than just in a book, is a very hard thing.
It's also incredibly gratifying when I see it come together, because like when so this is such an interesting part of what's been going on. So I've been, studying all these different things, Peterson, Vervaeke, McGilchrist, all this stuff. And I'm like, okay. And polyvagal theory. And so polyvagal, what it says is that all illness is essentially a social connection disorder.
Amazing.
Which is exactly what
relational.
Yeah, it's a relational disorder is what it is. Even with the divine. So what it explains is that there are states in the nervous system that allow you to connect with whatever the divine is for you.
Yeah.
And when you're traumatized, you can't do it because you are not relationally oriented. You are survival, primitive brain oriented. And so, I studied this and I realized, okay, social interaction, reciprocal connection, group, as we study Vervaeke, and he says, you've got the community, you've got the ritual, you have the practices, and that's all embedded in a hierarchy of function. And I kept thinking to myself, I need to be more social. I need to get into a group. I need to maybe go to a church, but I didn't know which one to go to. So it took me a number of years to figure out which one to go to. And it's one of those things where that theory, but you're trying to suss it out. And so what happened is I have a client who comes in every week. He's a really nice person, and he's very reciprocal and very thoughtful. And I've worked on his kids, and they're excellent people. His kids are great people. And they grew up in the church, and I was like, and his dad co-founded the church. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. This this is good sign,
Good
right?
sign.
And I'd like,
Exactly.
go over here. And
Exactly.
so I go there 2 months ago, or a little more than, and I told my partner, who was not interested at all,
Yeah.
I'm going. If you want to come, you're welcome. And she decided to come, and she loves it there. And it's
Amazing.
like, and it shows me
Amazing.
that it's real, because she,
Of course.
if it was bullshit, if
Yeah.
it was manipulative at all, she would have been
Yeah.
out of there in 2 seconds, right? So,
Yeah.
and it's because the people practice that. I mean, they're actually trying very hard to practice what they preach in how they engage in their way of being, And so this has all been very incredible to see in action. And it's actually affected both her and my level of happiness and function already.
Amazing.
We talked about that, how we're better together, and we're both individually
Yeah.
better since we've been going to this place. So this is, and and I understand it better because of what we're doing together. And I'm so thrilled about that. It's like, yes, enacted. Yes. It's like,
It's amazing.
so,
Thanks for sharing.
yeah, that's,
Yeah, that's a great anecdote.
Yeah. And I am and Rena are also at the same stage where we are trying to figure out, for me, I'm trying to explore what kind of practices, particularly similar, not quite the church, but perhaps some spiritual practices and communities that are close by that I can be part of, that allow some sort of exploration. But that reminds me of two observations around Vervaeke since he has done this course, because it's relative. This course was a few years ago.
right.
And if you have seen him more recently, I bring to attention two ideas. One is his 3-part lectures, 3 hours lectures with Vivian Dittmar.
Yeah, I've been through them.
I've been through them a few times. And what I really found interesting, and Cam would love your thoughts on it, is that because remember, he's clear that there is no metaphysical grounding necessary, but he is very actively exploring what the edges might look like between his psychological theory and what Vivian Dittmar is saying can be achieved through practices of her view of altered state of consciousness. So it's very interesting. And she is, if you haven't seen those 3 episodes, please do. It's really worth, and we can talk more about it. If not, it doesn't matter. But that to me was one observation, that he is actually beyond being a psychologist and the boundaries he sketched in this course. He's actually exploring what might be the interfaces to metaphysical. And the second thing I thought was apparently has done series of lectures with Jordan Peterson, and where he was invited to part of a course where there were a lot of religious people, and he went there very clearly saying he's neither an atheist nor a theist. He's what he is. And I think his exploration of many of the choices in that group comes from his desire to go engage with those deeply religious people, many of them with strong metaphysical convictions, but still trying to make sense of what they are understanding and grasping that he's not.
Well, so it's also, he's talked about his mystical experiences and his experiences with the manifestation of, who is it? Hermes?
Yes,
I haven't heard about
that was in 2019, I think he said, is when that first started happening.
Yeah.
So it's no longer, well, probably never was for him. So it's basically he's participating in some of the most mystical experiences that are probably available to a human being.
Yeah.
And I believe that it's not a lecture series, it's actually a seminar that you're referring to, which is led by Peterson, and it's on the New Testament. As far as I'm aware, it hasn't been published yet, but I could be wrong about that.
Are you talking, you're not talking about the Exodus series, or is that something else?
So there was a follow-on to the Exodus series that I don't think is published yet.
I agree.
They've talked about it. So, and
agree.
Vervaeke participated in that seminar.
Oh, I see. Okay, then, and I know that's interesting. So, because there was an episode with those two 4 weeks ago, the Meaning Crisis Resolution, Dr. Vervaeke.
They talk about it in that one, and Peterson has talked about it in other places, and he's been promoting it for some months now, along with his book.
Oh, okay. Okay.
where
So
he
he's
did
probably,
they did a follow on. Yeah, I went through the Exodus one, so I'm assuming it's a similar format with a little bit different. It's a lot of the same a lot of the same cast,
yeah. Okay.
same scholars involved, but this time Vervaeke's also involved in it for at least some of it.
Thank you for that.
So
Yeah, I'm gonna listen to the Vivian Ditmore. I meant to do that because Anurag, you mentioned that before, and I'm very excited about that because I mean, I think we've talked this before, but my real passion is practices and personal transformation. That's what I
Yes.
want, and it seems like both of you want that too. So when we get through this, maybe we can explore how we can support each other in that endeavor, because that's my passion is
I agree.
that process. I want to be in that relevance realization process is what I'm after.
yeah, so I
That's
would extend that. So full disclosure here, Anurag, Michael and I had a brief get together in your absence since the last time the three of us got together,
Awesome.
and I had extended the invitation at that time to enter into some sort of first person participatory, so not over a Zoom thing, but an
I understand.
actual live action thing. And in listening to you this evening, Michael, I mean, the hope is you're already farther along the practice. You're way deeper into the practical application in that you see clients, and I don't really do that, at least not in a formal sense.
right.
But I do notice on an ongoing basis that almost all of my personal interactions feel increasingly as such. And
That
I have been noticing that it's a little bit startling in a lot of instances because I will draw rapt attention from people. And
Yep.
that is like,
Yep.
oh wow. And that so there's something about the visual that I see is like I've been playing around with the chakra scheme too. And so the words coming out of my mouth are something like they're hitting things inside the other body in a manner that is, I mean, it's striking something, and the
Right.
skill with which those, whatever those messages are being delivered is more than a skill. It's the quality. It's both the quality of delivery. Yeah, I'm not saying that very well. There's
Well,
skill in delivery, and there's quality of intent, I suppose, something like that. Quality of the.
yeah. Well, I would call it, there's an integral
There you go.
synchronous or coming together of what you say and what you're embodying. I mean, that's because that's this interesting thing that I have noticed, even in the grief group that I'm part of, is that people will talk, and when they're not really connected with themselves, when I can't hear it because it's skewed, right? And then when someone else talks and they're really in their emotions in a very integral way, and they're really where they are, then I feel it and I start to join them, right? So this is an interesting
uh,
observation and I remember there was a talk or a debate between Holman Hughes and this New York Times guy about equity or something. And God, the New York Times guy, I just couldn't listen to him. It was like such garbage coming out of him. And when Coleman talks, he's clear, he's calm, he's centered. No trouble understanding what he means, right? And this other guy, you're like, what the fuck did he just say? Even though it seemed to be clear. And so I think that's what you're talking about, and that's what we all feel, right? So when you're with someone that's speaking from an integral place, it's not about right or wrong. It's about this. They're speaking from where they are, right? So it's honest, or in a sense. Then you
yeah.
feel that resonance, and then it's everything shifts and I think that what you're saying about, even though you're not working directly with people like I am, it matters to some degree, but it doesn't really matter ultimately, because if you're coming from that place you're trying to come from, I believe it transforms the world in its own right, right? Because people are
Thank you.
moved by what you say,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's like they feel the truth in what you're doing and are saying, and it affects them. It calls them forth, I think, to some degree.
That's
Well, We're at time. I can
Yeah, we're
keep
at
going,
time.
but
It's a wonderful, wonderful note on which to close today. You want to express some closing remarks, Cam?
well, yeah, I'll just express a deep appreciation for the opportunity to practice with the two of you. It's delightful, as always. Yeah, and I'll give deference, gesture humility to those who have gone before and afforded us this opportunity, and confess a hope for all good that may come.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll close on that for everyone. Thank you so much.
Great. So you'll see you in 2 weeks, right? Everyone's good for the 2 weeks?
Yeah.
And I think, let me double
Let me
check.
stop the recording.